how could there be an innocent explanation for unexplained DNA in several places? The cops thought it could be transferred during the manufacturing phase, but it could also be DNA on a carpet or a bed or blanket that was transferred while JonBenet was dressed or redressed. What also seems to be missed is the notion, firstly, that JonBenet was wiped down, and I think that is a notion that the coroner suggested. Secondly, that she seemed to be redressed in bloomers that were too big for her. And thirdly, that this entire crime scene was contaminated, not only in a macro fashion with various people wandering in and out, but also in a micro fashion with JonBenet herself being carried around, people throwing themselves over her body while grieving, and a blanket and shirt thrown over her while she lay on a carpet. Even Linda Arndt added to the combination of contamination by picking up JonBenet's body where John had placed it, down at her feet in the hallway, and transplanting it below the Christmas tree. Do you notice, as we simply attempt to counter a simple statement, how easy it is to get lost in all the confusing minutiae? And that's the strength of a myth and the intruder theory. It is in its simplicity. Let's go back to the letter. Solving this crime remains our goal, and its ultimate resolution will depend on more than just matching DNA. However, given the history of the publicity surrounding this case, I believe it is important and appropriate to provide you with our opinion that your family was not responsible for this crime. And then, why? Based on the DNA results. Once again, you can see DA Mary Lacy basically based her entire assessment of the Ramsey case on DNA. Given that she looked at this evidence and responded the way that she did, no wonder John has latched onto this as his default story when talking about the case up until modern times, up until right now. Who cares about the ransom note? Who cares about the autopsy evidence? Who cares about medical history? Who cares about bedwetting? Who cares about knot types or family dynamics? No, this is much simpler and much easier. The biggest myth associated with this case is that it's a DNA case, but right here in 2008 with Mary Lacy is where that myth got its start, and it is a very damaging myth. If you really think about it, if the DNA was such a game changer, why didn't Team Ramsey push the DNA angle from the beginning? Why didn't John and Patsy say they wanted DNA results and testing in their very first interview with Brian Cabell on CNN on January 1st? I mean, the unexplained DNA profile is a male, and Patsy was saying then, we don't know if it's a he or a she. But a male profile, if you really want to nail those colors to the mast, well then stop looking into Patsy. And stop looking at the housekeeper, and stop suggesting that Priscilla White might be a suspect, as Patsy did as late as her 1998 interview with the cops. My point is, not even the Ramseys seemed to take the DNA aspect seriously until Mary Lacy did. And even the testing that was done didn't lead to anything for the next 20 years. Do you see how a case can be made that Mary Lacy may have done the most damage to the Ramsey case, even more than Alex Hunter? Now, as regards the rest of her letter, are there any other notes that are off? She writes, to the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime, I am deeply sorry. No innocent person should have to endure such an extensive trial in the court of public opinion, especially when public officials have not had sufficient evidence to initiate a trial in a court of law. I have the greatest respect for the way you and your family have handled this adversity. Now that postscript there, I have the greatest respect for the way you've handled this, is also not necessary, but it just shows to what extent Mary Lacy has, in my opinion, drank the Kool-Aid. It just is very much over the line of neutrality. And, if you think about this whole thing, to say, public officials have not had sufficient evidence to initiate a trial. That is what the grand jury investigation was all about. And just think about that. Really? Public officials have not had sufficient evidence to initiate a trial. During a 13-month grand jury investigation, there wasn't sufficient evidence. The grand jury didn't seem to think so. The grand jury didn't say so. The grand jury didn't vote in those terms. This seems to be Lacy simply parroting what her predecessor said, what Alex Hunter said. Had Hunter simply signed those 4 indictments, there would have been a trial. and not on one charge, but on several charges. And Lacey seems to be leaving that crucial bit of information out from her detailed letter of apology. And that raises some interesting questions. Did Mary Lacey know about it, these true bills, these indictments, and not reveal it, or did she not know about it? Did she know about the indictments, but because she was a fan of the intruder theory, simply ignored them, or did she not know about it? Let's go back to her letter. She writes, I'm aware that there will be those who will choose to continue to differ with our conclusion. Again, but DNA is very often the most reliable forensic evidence we can hope to find, and we rely on it often to bring to justice those who have committed crimes. I am very comfortable that our conclusion that this evidence which is DNA evidence, has vindicated your family is based firmly on all the evidence, including the reliable forensic DNA evidence. She seems to be speaking in circles. She's saying it's all about DNA, but you know what, we are also basing our conclusion on all the evidence, but especially the DNA evidence. And I mean, if you read through this letter, she mentions DNA again and again and again and again, right? And then she says the reliable forensic DNA that has been developed as a result of advances in that scientific field. So she's kind of, in a way, blaming, if that's the word. She's saying advances in the science of DNA has allowed us to break the case. We've solved the case. We can see that you are innocent. Okay, so who's guilty? We've solved the case. We've got the DNA. We've found the perpetrator. Okay, so where is he? Really? Based firmly on all the evidence? So who wrote the ransom note? She goes on to write, we intend in the future to treat you as the victims of this crime with the sympathy due you because of the horrific loss you suffered. Otherwise, we will continue to refrain from publicly discussing the evidence in this case. Now, I do think, right or wrong, guilty or innocent, what's easy to miss is the Ramsey parents are victims here. I think Burke Ramsey is a victim as well. But no one is a bigger victim or paid a greater price than JonBenet. She's the only true victim here and the only innocent victim in this story. I do think it is worth considering, even if Patsy wrote the ransom note and even if she has a case to answer for, she was also a victim of sorts. She also has a story that involved suffering and loss and hardship. Not just the loss of her daughter. She was fighting for her own life in 1993. That cancer, stage 4, 3 years before the incident. And I think if there was a trial and if a jury decided Patsy wrote the note, wouldn't they take those circumstances into consideration? I mean, those are very extenuating, mitigating, especially for a young mother trying to raise 2 young children essentially alone. Going back to the letter, we hope that we will one day obtain a DNA match from the CODIS databank that will lead to further evidence and to the solution of this crime. With recent legislative changes throughout the country, the number of profiles available for comparison in the CODIS databank is growing steadily. Law enforcement agencies are receiving increasing numbers of cold hits, blah, blah, blah. We hope that one day soon we will get a match to this perpetrator. Well, did that happen? In hindsight, almost 20 years worth, it's proved just how foolhardy this approach has been. It's another wild goose chase following the John Mark Karr wild goose chase. And 20 years on, some people seem to be only too happy to chase wild geese and get nowhere. And I'm sure it suits JonBenet's killer that people continue to focus on DNA that's likely a tiny, inconclusive mixed sample at the end of the day. Anyway, then Mary Lacey signs the letter, 20th Judicial District, and there it is, Boulder, Colorado. So let me ask you, do you think I'm wrong about this? Do you think I'm biased? Maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm biased, but then so is Stan Garnett, the next DA, Mary Lacey's successor, who also said,
current Boulder DA Stan Garnett says an apology to the Ramseys was inappropriate.
It created the impression that the evidence in the case is much clearer than it is. The evidence is very compromised.
And that's really the legacy of Mary Lacey. She created a false impression that this is a very black and white case, that it's all about DNA. And there are a lot of you out there, I know, that also repeat and reiterate that it's just about DNA and that's how we're going to solve the case. Please stop doing that. And Stan Garnett's not the only person saying this. According to ABC, former Adams County DA, that's another district attorney, Bob Grant, he was one of a number of consultants on the Ramsey case, brought in early on. He told ABC News he was confounded by Lacey's 2008 decision as well. He called it craziness. He said, this is craziness. This is not what prosecutors do. If prosecutors are going to exonerate someone, they do it by charging someone else. And of course, Mary Lacey tried to do that by going after John Mark Karr. He quacked like the duck they were after. He looked like the duck they were after. He said he was the duck they were looking for. But then when it came down to the DNA, this thing that Mary Lacey is sort of fixated on, it turned out he wasn't the duck they were looking for after all. By the way, did you know they took a surreptitious sample of Karr's DNA, didn't test it then, and arrested him anyway?
Respect in our expert from the Denver lab said that the sample in the underwear of the victim was a mixed sample, and that we do not want to compare a mixed sample with a mixed sample. We need a pristine sample. That means a buccal swab. We did. We took surreptitious DNA on multiple occasions. Immediately upon locating this person who went to mailboxes to pick up a package that we sent to him, 2 different officers took DNA off of the bicycle that he rode back. On a separate occasion, they obtained a cup that he used to drink from and a tissue or wipe that he used to wipe his hands. The bottom line is that after we did that, our expert, and we put a great deal of respect in our expert from the Denver lab, said that the sample in the underwear of the victim was a mixed sample, and that we do not want to compare a mixed sample with a mixed sample.
Whoopsie, so I guess it being a mixed sample to begin with, that mattered. Then in 2016, Mary Lacey, this is 8 years later, Mary Lacey explained why she wrote the letter. She said, here's what I was doing with the exoneration letter. I was trying to prevent a horrible travesty of justice. I was scared to death that despite the fact that there was no evidence, no psychopathy, and no motive, the case was a train going down the track, and the Ramseys were tied to that track. So, what do you think? Did Mary Lacey succeed in trying to prevent a horrible travesty of justice? I'm not going to take it further than that. I want to thank members only for being here, listening to the end. I will probably release this in a couple of weeks to the ordinary subscribers, but I'm sure you guys enjoyed getting first dibs at this. It certainly is an interesting narrative, isn't it? Thank you again for listening. I look forward to seeing you guys in the live stream later today, and I'll see you guys next time.